All right, you're looking at a live picture right there as the House Judiciary Committee debating the articles of impeachment. They're taking a break right there. Started at 9 o'clock and it's going into 9:04 Eastern Standard Time. Now the House Judiciary Committee really debating those two articles of impeachment this Thursday and getting into quite a heated debate. Everybody standing on partisan lines, really setting up a vote by Democratic-controlled House next week. That's what they're hoping to get a vote there next week. But we'll have to wait and see how tonight turns out. That is also not expected to make the president very happy, because if it does get to the House next week, it is expected to pass, making Donald Trump the third U.S. president to be impeached. Now, the House impeaches Trump on a couple of charges, and we want to go through that: the abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. He would then go into trial. That trial would then take place in the Senate, which, of course, you know, is Republican-led. And we have discussed this pretty extensively here at CBSN, that the Republican-led Senate is unlikely to vote to find the president guilty. So there is a lot that is going on, and we have Zeke Miller. He is a CBSN political contributor and White House correspondent for the Associated Press. So, Zeke, let's get our viewers all caught up with what kind of happened today at 9:05 p.m. It started at 9 a.m. There's a lot to kind of get everybody up to date on.
Yeah, so the House Judiciary Committee conducted their markup, which was essentially considering all sorts of amendments to those articles of impeachment. It was kind of baked in. We sort of knew where it was going to end, but it was a formality that the committee had to take, and sort of the next step on that process, setting up that floor vote next week, when the president is, at this point, all but certain to be the third in American history to be impeached. So that's going to be a momentous occasion. At the same time, though, on a parallel track, and that's sort of the great mysteries of how Washington works. As the president moves closer to impeachment, you see progress on all sorts of significant legislative fronts. From earlier this week, bipartisan progress on towards the USMCA, the modernization of NAFTA. Democrats and Republicans come together with the White House on that front. Progress on a funding bill to keep the government open beyond next Friday through next year. And then also, then recently, just a couple of hours ago, indications that the White House and China were moving closer on a trade deal there, on the preliminary trade deal there. So a very busy day in Washington, and a little inconclusive, and it's really unclear how all of those things will shake out politically and substantively.
Well, it's been a very long 2 days on Capitol Hill, to say the least. So what do you think the mood is right now? I mean, it seemed like it was getting contentious there for a while, and everybody just kind of standing on bipartisan lines.
Yeah, it's certainly contentious, in part impatience. Tonight was also the congressional ball at the White House, where the president and first lady were hosting members of Congress, some of them who were on Capitol Hill trying to impeach him, which is kind of a bit of just a little bit awkward. And so there's a little bit of tensions that are surrounding that. There are people who want to go back home to their districts, and certainly looming is that next Friday you can sort of smell the jet fumes here, sort of the metaphor we use often in Washington, where people want to go home and start the holiday season early, so they want to clear the decks on all of these issues: impeachment, USMCA, government funding, as soon as possible. And nobody quite is sure yet how they'll interact with each other. So it'll be very interesting to see, legislatively, the whip operations on all sides over the next few days as they try to get things done before the holiday season.
All right, let's talk about the congressional ball. The president did speak. Anything that we need to know about? Anything that he said about what's going on regarding the House Judiciary debates?
He kept it, pretty tame as things go for President Trump. We didn't see him go launch into big personal invectives or anything like that. He's sort of one of those moments where he sort of acted the role of president in one of those opulent ceremonial settings that we've seen him adopt. And then you see that on one end, and then you look at his Twitter account and see essentially a record number of tweets and retweets from the president on a day of him venting frustration and amplifying the comments of his allies. So in a way, it is a split-screen day in Washington, both at the president at the White House and Capitol Hill. So it is a kind of, you can be forgiven for having some whiplash here.
Definitely feeling the whiplash tonight. All right, hold on there, Zeke. Let's bring in Rebecca Kaplan. She's a CBS News Capitol Hill producer. So, Rebecca, let's start off with you. It's been a long 2 days. Give us your perspective. I mean, are they going to go through the night with this, or is there a timeline?
I mean, things are definitely not slowing down as to when Republicans are going to offer amendments. Probably about an hour before this break was kind of suddenly called, we heard one of the members on the GOP side say they had several more amendments, and considering that every single one has gotten somewhere around 2.5 hours of debate so far today, it looks like we could be on pace for a very, very late night up here. But that doesn't actually mean that we're getting a lot of new substance with each of these amendment debates. Another funny remark that kind of got the room laughing a couple of minutes ago was when Representative McClintock, a Republican, joked that nothing new has been said in 3 hours. And actually, I don't think it was that much of a joke. I think it's actually true. It's been a while. We are kind of getting into this cycle of people repeating things that they have said over and over and over again throughout the day. We are relitigating arguments from 8 hours ago because members have now been here in this hearing room. If you take out an hour break where they went to vote, for about 11 hours today. So certainly tempers are beginning to run a little bit high. Patience is wearing thin, but there is so far no end in sight.
Yeah, it kind of gave me a flashback of like filibusters that happen with the Congress, right?
Exactly.
What is this mood like? And can it go through the night logistically? What do you think?
Honestly, we're in a holding pattern at this point. The question now is how many more amendments do Republicans want to bring up? Because they know at the end of the day they're not actually going to be able to change the substance of this bill. Democrats control the votes on this committee because they have the majority in Congress. That's why every single amendment vote you see today has failed by a vote of 23 to 17. That's 23 Democrats in the room, 17 Republicans. So over and over again, that's what happens. So at this point, the GOP isn't actually going to they certainly are going to slow down the articles of impeachment by keeping everyone here late, but they're not going to substantively change what's happening. What they can do is continue to have an outlet to air their frustrations. They can make this process as painful as possible for Democrats. So that's what we're seeing. But ultimately, when all is said and done, when there are no more amendments they have to offer, maybe when everyone finally gets really, really, really tired, we will have a final vote, two separate votes actually, on Article 1. That is the abuse of power article of impeachment, and then Article 2, that is the obstruction of obstruction of Congress article. And that would wrap up today's markup, and then those articles make their way to the full House floor for an anticipated vote next week.
Yeah, that's expected to be on Thursday. That's what's on the docket. But can I ask you a question going back to Republicans? And kind of using this filibustering kind of approach and going back and forth and everybody kind of digging their heels in the sand in a very bipartisan way. Do you think it's about the headline for their constituents when they go back home tomorrow that Republicans did everything that they could on Capitol Hill today to do what is necessary? Do you think it's more of a political play?
I think it certainly is really both. I mean, there's two things going on here. There is the desire to, make this, like I said, as painful as possible for their Democratic colleagues because they feel like they have been railroaded. They feel like they have had their rights taken away through this process. It's also about defending the president, and they're speaking to a couple audiences here. They're speaking to the president himself, who we have seen throughout the day is certainly tuning into some of these proceedings. They're speaking to their constituents back home who support them, but also support the president and are going to be, watching for any signs of daylight between these members and the president. So they have to make sure that they are, being really full-throated supporters. And look, a lot of these guys truly believe that the president did nothing wrong in the situation and that there is, as they say, a witch hunt against him. Now, Democrats obviously take a very different view of this, and they are on the entire other end of the spectrum. They're going to go ahead and let their GOP colleagues stay here as long as they want to keep offering amendments, but they're not going to stop defending what they see as a pretty open and shut case. They say the president was abusing his power by soliciting Ukraine's interference in that election, and they're going to keep hammering that point home again and again and again. They're not shying away from these allegations that they're making, and they're going to keep going as long as the Republicans keep them here tonight.
All right, Rebecca, hold on right there. Let's bring Zeke back into the conversation. And we talked about the president at the congressional ball and that he didn't say much, but he said a lot throughout the day. So let's kind of up-to-date viewers on what's the official stance and where the president stands.
Well, in more than 100 and some odd tweets today, we've heard variations of it's a witch hunt. Read the transcript. Nothing. There's nothing wrong. He did nothing wrong in this process, and this calls for investigations of Joe Biden, this conversations with the Ukrainian government. So a lot of the same from the president. This is essentially, from the White House perspective, something that was baked in. This die was cast here months ago. They see this, if not a year ago when Democrats took power, they view this as inevitable, and that's the way they've been trying to position this to their supporters. Nothing that is happening today or nothing that will happen next week when the full House is expected to vote will be a surprise to really anyone involved. They're trying to build up expectations for that Senate trial where the president is, where Republicans control things and where the president is almost certainly they're going to be acquitted. The challenge and sort of the real action at the White House over the past couple of days has really been about the format of that Senate trial. The president obviously wanting some sort of big spectacle where he gets to call people like Joe Biden, Adam Schiff, Hunter Biden, potentially the intelligence community whistleblower, and the message from Republicans up on Capitol Hill in the Senate has been pretty resoundingly, don't do that. That's going to make things worse for you. Open Pandora's box, because for every one of those witnesses you try to call, Democrats are going to try to call Mick Mulvaney or Mike Pompeo or other people who can offer testimony that would be embarrassing to the president. So that's been where the real action is. We haven't really seen a lot of messaging around impeachment per se. It's been a lot of what's going to come next, really at the beginning of next year, the framing of that debate that's going to dominate the early part of 2020.
Rebecca, let's talk about the nuclear option. There is a possibility to force that vote. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. The nuclear option here, there is a procedural maneuver that Chairman Nadler could use to effectively shut down any further debate on these articles of impeachment. But aides that we have spoken to throughout the day really do not anticipate pulling that trigger. It's extremely rare. And frankly, the Republicans are already so upset about what they see as a loss of minority rights that to end debate on this markup, I think would just really, really make them boil over. And I think, Democrats are determined to let them finish making their arguments and let this run its course. So it is there. It is the escape hatch. But, markups on the Hill can go very late. They can go well into the night. It's not uncommon, especially on big defense bills that have hundreds of amendments, for lawmakers to be working until 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So it's certainly, this is something that lawmakers have seen before. It's rare, but it could just be a very long night until everyone runs out of steam.
Well, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did accuse Democrats of rushing to a vote. And, I got to imagine this timeline for what's going to be the Senate trial it's going to look different because the divide is so different. So, Rebecca, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly. And as you point out, that's actually a great point about concerns about seeming like this is rushed, and any effort to shut down this markup debate could open up Democrats to accusations that they are trying to move too quickly and are trying to ram this process through. Now, when we get to the Senate, things just look very different. I mean, for one, the biggest difference is that Republicans are in charge, and likely they will come to an agreement with the Democrats to set the schedule and lay out a trial. You have all senators sitting in the chamber hearing evidence, which could go on for weeks at a time. And, one of the debates that we are seeing is how long exactly they would have this trial for. Do you have an extended trial where they call a lot of witnesses? This is something the president himself has expressed a desire to see, the chance to call a number of witnesses and really feel fully exonerated with evidence in the Senate. Or do you keep it shorter and perhaps open yourself up to less controversy? That's definitely the preference of a lot of senators, even Republicans in the Senate at this point, because you start calling in more and more witnesses, you just have a lot more unknown factors. What could happen? What could they say? And, do you honor requests to bring in people like former Vice President Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden? It just really opens up this whole new complex dimension. And so there's this ongoing tension about how to handle it. It seems like now decisions are being deferred until after the House finishes voting on their own articles of impeachment, which, like you said, is expected next week. We're hearing probably Wednesday that could be on the floor of the House. Next week, by the way, it's going to be a gangbusters week up here on Capitol Hill. We have a lot of things going on. The House is going to vote on this big year-long appropriations package on Tuesday. That's funding the government. If they don't get that done by Friday, that means we could be looking at another holiday shutdown. But there was a deal agreed to in principle today, so that's looking good. We have impeachment coming up on Wednesday. We have the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement probably coming to the House floor on Thursday, that big trade deal that is this whole extra dimension we added to everything going on up here. Yesterday, Democrats announcing they had a deal with the White House on a trade bill on a day when they were also unveiling articles of impeachment. So everything's been really fast moving up here, cramming a lot into the final 2 weeks of session.
Oh, yeah, they're cramming a lot. I'm exhausted by exactly what you just said. Zeke,
right?
Yeah, really, I am exhausted. Zeke, let's talk about exactly what's happening with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in the Senate. I'm sure everybody's listening very closely, especially senators. Is there a nugget that they can learn from what's happening right here at the Judiciary Committee that they could probably take into the Senate trial?
If there is a lesson here, as this extends later in the night, is that while the outcome may be maybe foreseen, may be predictable, giving the minority the rights, the appearance of a fair hearing, and the ability to have the votes they want to have is important. And so that's an indication, why we're hearing now that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is not going to sort of immediately move to bring up a motion to dismiss the articles of impeachment against the president. He's trying to defend his majority and take care of vulnerable Republicans in the Senate. So he's mindful of the fact that if he were to sort of allow an immediate dismissal to take place, and it's not even clear that there are votes to do that, as much as the president might want that, that's not the sort of thing that would necessarily fly. So he would have to provide some sort of semblance of due process of a trial, but also not keep it going too long. He has an agenda he wants to get to. He doesn't want an impeachment that dominates the next year, certainly for the same reason, to protect his vulnerable members, and not to mention the president. So there are some lessons here for Republicans to be learning about how much deference to give to due process and fairness in these sort of proceedings. At the same time, there's also managing the president. The White House is keenly watching these proceedings. They have sort of a war room that they're not calling a war room set up in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, watching them putting out rapid response sorts of things. So that's a preview of what we're going to see in a Senate trial. But obviously the dynamics there, the politics there are different. Where it's Republican controlled, it's certainly fairer ground for the president. And all indications now are there that will be a far swifter proceedings than the past 2 months have been up in the House.
Oh, I'm sure everybody's trying to figure out what kind of strategy they can expect and what they're going to pursue. I'm sure this is just definitely a moment for them to pause and reflect and kind of gear up. Rebecca, what do you think House Democrat leadership are really thinking about the arguments that are taking place today?
Well, I think they're pretty happy to see their members go out and make a pretty vociferous defense of these articles of impeachment. There was debate within the Democratic caucus about how far it should go. Do you go with just these two articles that we've seen, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, or there were other members who wanted to broaden it out and see more things included from the Mueller report. So that's potentially an obstruction of justice charge, going back to all these episodes the special counsel outlined in which the president appeared to be trying to shut down the special counsel investigation. Now, ultimately, they all came together around these two articles of impeachment. So Democratic leadership is probably pretty happy that their members have really rallied around these two articles and made a strong defense of them. Now, one interesting thing that dynamic that's developed over the course of today is this difference in how the two parties are handling this upcoming impeachment vote. We've seen the House leadership make a decision that they are going to be very hands-off with their members, let them all come to their own decisions. Speaker Pelosi said earlier today that they are not going to be whipping this vote, and that means they're not going to be going to members and trying to get them to vote one way or another, something that will happen on sometimes some big legislative priorities for the party. Instead, they've said members have to make their own decisions. And even with that strategy, they're only expecting really a few defections. There's two Democrats, Representative Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey and Colin Peterson from Minnesota, who voted against moving forward with this whole public impeachment phase. So we don't expect that either of them to vote in favor of these articles of impeachment, although Colin Peterson is leaving the door open a little bit. But, otherwise, even some of these moderate members in tough districts, a lot of them are lining up and saying, we really have a problem with how the president behaved in this case. We are going to support these articles of impeachment. Now, Republicans, on the other hand, actually did get what's called a whip notice today from Whip Steve Scalise. That's just a notice that his team was going to check in with Republicans and see how they were feeling, and they are recommending a no vote. Now, despite that difference in approach and how they're coming at this, we don't actually expect any Republican defections. One GOP aide I spoke to today told me that they were feeling very confident about their numbers, that they're not going to lose any Republicans on this vote next week. So we really do expect a almost entirely party line vote when these these articles of impeachment make it to the House floor next week.
Zeke, Mitch McConnell had said that he wanted a short Senate trial, but of course there's been a lot of back and forth, especially with the president, who basically tweeted, "Bring it on," and has been very, very kind of open about clearing his name and vindicating himself. How do you think this is going to play out? Who's going to win out in this war?
If past his prologue here, probably Mitch McConnell. He's at this point the master of the Senate. He's been able to bend that body to his will, and essentially bend the president to his will. He's gotten what he's wanted, what he has wanted on all sorts of issues, judicial appointments, things he's been able to convince the president are priorities of his own, even when they are, really McConnell's. That's McConnell's playing the long game here. The president is taking to Twitter, having his aides go out saying he wants that elongated trial. He wants that vindication out of the Senate trial process. He wants to be able to call the Bidens. He wants to call the whistleblowers. He wants to call Adam Schiff. From McConnell's perspective, this is just essentially he's going to allow the president to vent, and then early next year or over the holiday season, get together with the White House officials, and there are a lot of White House officials who agree with him already, to basically convince the president, take the easier path, take the victory, take the acquittal that is likely to follow, and call it a day and move on and focus on your reelection. It's not worth opening Pandora's box of an elongated trial, because then things get very unpredictable. Things are pretty safe for the president right now, where Republicans have the majority in the Senate. You start calling all sorts of witnesses. It's hard to predict at that point what could happen, what new can come out, what will Democrats try to do, will there be divisions within the Senate Republican conference. All of those things are open. The door to open all of that opens up the longer that trial goes on. So McConnell is telling the president, "I understand you want something. Yeah, you want that vindication, but just take the victory, take the acquittal." And so those are the conversations that are going on right now across Pennsylvania Avenue.
Zeke, I want to know: is the president, you think, afraid to testify himself? And also, we need to discuss the Rudy Giuliani factor in all of this.
Yeah, I mean, the president has said he is open to testifying, either by in written testimony. We've not really heard any indication he's willing to testify in person or under oath, sort of live in any sort of recorded context. And that's consistent if you look back on his long career of in business, having to testify in depositions and the like. His lawyers have always tried to get him out of those things. There were concerns around the Mueller investigation. If he had submitted to an in-person interview with the special counsel, Robert Mueller, that it could have been sort of what lawyers and aides the president called sort of, quote, a perjury trap. The president is often a little loose with the truth at times, and that could have been an issue for him if he was to be testifying under oath. So that was not something that they ever wanted to subject the president to. And that's sort of setting aside all sorts of constitutional issues that could be called up here. Unlike the Clinton impeachment issue, these are not personal matters of that the president is sort of being under investigation for. These are official acts largely that he's being called to answer for. So some of the White House is saying that would be a submission to Congress on executive powers grounds. So that's a sort of all sorts of issues. It seems very unlikely that would happen under pretty much any circumstance. The Rudy Giuliani question is a whole nother one, which is essentially if they were to if Republicans were to try to call Joe Biden or anything like that, we're already Democrats are signaling one of their first witnesses would be Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney. That would be a fight, but there are indications that there are a couple of Republicans who would be interested in hearing Rudy Giuliani, and that's sort of setting aside the legal trouble he's in with the Justice Department investigating his actions on a number of fronts. So there are a lot of wild cards here at aides inside the White House, Mitch McConnell on Capitol Hill. Others are trying to advise the president go for the certainty and avoid the unknowns.
And of course, the timeline also being an issue, a big issue, as we kind of back it all up into the 2020 elections. Rebecca, let's talk about a lot of the nuances that we saw happening today. My question is, why did Democratic leadership, have to really speak instead of voting no right away? What is the process of that, and can you walk us through it?
The process of speaking in this hearing instead of going straight to a vote?
Yes, exactly.
Well, Sure. Well, let's talk about a markup. It's this kind of arcane, not totally arcane, but this is really kind of going back to the basics of how a bill becomes a law. Typically, when a bill is introduced into Congress, it will go to the committee and once the bill is fully written, it goes through this process, what we're seeing today, called a markup. And that is when members get to offer amendments to try to change the bill, shape it, make some refinements before it gets to the floor. And because these committees are made up of these members who work on issues all the time, typically they're more of the experts in this case. So here we're talking articles of impeachment. These are a lot of lawyers on the House Judiciary Committee, so a lot of legal debate going back and forth. So what we've seen all day is the Republicans proposing various amendments. The Democrats came into this very happy with the bill text they had written. There was a lot of debate, as we talked about what exactly to include in these articles of impeachment. They narrowed it down, so they're happy with what they have. They don't want to make any changes. So all the suggestions we've seen have come from the Republican side, and that is, efforts to strike out entire portions of the bill. We saw two of those from Representative Jim Jordan, one to strike Article 1, which is the abuse of power article, and from another member, we saw an amendment to completely strike Article 2, the obstruction of Congress charge. So this is not a situation where members on both sides of the aisle are trying to work together to kind of produce a compromise product. This is just Republicans airing their grievances with the articles of impeachment and just kind of forcing Democrats to go through this process of hearing them out. And what we'll see at the end is they'll actually vote on these articles of impeachment to send them to the full House floor. But part of the reason this has gone on for so long is that on every single amendment that is offered, any member on the committee can say that they motion to, quote, strike the last word. So those of you who have been following along all day have probably heard this over and over and over again. That's the procedural trigger that allows a member to speak for 5 minutes or to yield their time to someone else, another member. So on every single amendment, every member on the committee, that is 41 people, 40 today because Representative Lieu is out for a medical reason, can ask for 5 minutes of time. So let me do some quick back-of-the-envelope math for you. That's up to almost 3.5 hours of debate on every single amendment is possible. We've seen about 2.5, but that's why this has gone on for so long, is because members just can talk forever and ever during these markups to make their point.
And we saw the biggest debate happening over really what the article accusing abuse of power, really, didn't we? That went on and on.
Absolutely. That's been a lot of the focus because it kind of gets to the core of these charges that Democrats are making against the president about what he did. So, we saw Republicans going back to the testimony that they heard and trying to bring up inconsistencies in the testimony, reiterating over and over again the idea that the aid to Ukraine was ultimately released, that President Zelensky got a meeting with President Trump, none at the White House as he wanted, but he did get a meeting. So they've gone back to that over and over again, being critical of the process. And Democrats have defended their testimony and essentially asked their Republican colleagues, how is it that you feel so radically differently about this? How is it that you see this so differently than we do?
Zeke, let's talk about Pam Bondi and why she is an important player in the next couple of steps.
Yeah, she's the former Florida Attorney General. She's been an ally of the president for a number of years, was a fairly vocal supporter of his on cable news, particularly Fox News, over that same time period. And she was one of the two people, the other being former Treasury Department spokesman Tony Fay, who was brought in by the president a month or so ago to manage the internal response to impeachment. And that is everything from legal strategy in her case, because she's obviously an attorney, but also the communication strategy. She is viewed as somebody who can sort of bridge the gap between lawyers on the legal side, the congressional relations side, the legislative affairs side, and then the communication side. Because obviously this is, as much as we're going to be calling this a trial in the Senate, these are all politicians carrying this trial out. This is a political process. Impeachment is inherently political, and she was viewed as one of those people who can help bridge the divide between all of those different pieces of expertise. That said, she doesn't have a sort of extensive relationships on Capitol Hill, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
All right, Zeke, hold on there for a minute. Rebecca has Representative David Cicilline, who's giving his take on everything that happened today. Rebecca?
Congressman Cicilline, thank you for joining us. We are 11 hours into this markup at this point, and a lot of Americans have been at work all day. They're spending time with their families tonight. What do you hope they take away if they only see a few minutes of the debate today?
I hope what they take away is that the President of the United States used the enormous power of his office in an effort to corrupt our elections by dragging a foreign power into the 2020 election to really cheat and to help in his reelection, and used hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money as as leverage to try to achieve that objective, and that we're here to hold the president accountable. We cannot allow this president or any president to solicit foreign assistance in the re-election campaign of the president. If we do that, if we allow that to happen, we will lose control of our democracy. The American people will not have say in who's going to be their president. The only people who have a right to decide the American presidential election are the American people. And we need to hold the president accountable who has attempted to bring foreign powers in this, into this campaign, and thereafter really engage in an effort to obstruct Congress's investigation of this misconduct. And, we took an oath of office on our first day to protect and defend the Constitution, and that's what this hearing is about. This is about protecting our democracy. If we allow President Trump to do what he's now done twice, first he welcomed Russian assistance in his first campaign in 2016, then he actively solicited Ukrainian assistance. If we allow that to happen, we'll lose control of our democracy. We won't have a democracy anymore. We'll have a dictatorship or a monarchy. And so we're here today in a deadly serious way fighting to preserve our democracy, to make sure that our elections are free and fair, and they're free from foreign interference.
Here's a question for you, though. The committees are continuing their investigations on a number of fronts. Chairman Schiff told us that they are still looking into how far back this potential abuse of power goes. What happens if you impeach the president in the House, he is acquitted in the Senate, and then you find more things that he has done that you find to be additional impeachable offenses? You've already gone through this process. What then?
Well, I think, we'll continue to do oversight work, both the Judiciary Committee and the other committees of jurisdiction. But the reason we have to move forward at this moment is this is a crime in progress. The president's private lawyer was back in Ukraine last week, and this effort continues. And, we have an election right around the corner. My Republican colleagues have been arguing, why don't we just wait till the next election? Well, the problem with that is the president's misconduct is he's trying to corrupt the election and cheat in 2020. So relying on let's just wait till 2020 is not a very satisfactory answer. So this is urgent. This is an immediate threat to the integrity of our elections, to the national security of our country, and we have a responsibility to move forward expeditiously.
And one final quick question for you. You sit on party leadership. You have a number of members. You guys took the majority by flipping districts where the president won in 2016. They have a lot of supporters of the president back home. What do you counsel them about what to do about these articles?
Look, I think everyone has to really, this is a vote of conscience. I think we have a responsibility to make a decision based on the evidence and the Constitution and the oath of office we took. And there's nobody lobbying anybody or whipping this. I think people are expected to vote their conscience. I think when they see the evidence is overwhelming and really uncontradicted, that the president abused the power of his office and really undermine the national security of our country to try to cheat in the 2020 election by dragging a foreign power into it, that we really have no choice but to move forward with impeachment.
All right, Representative Cicilline, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. So, Sukanya, there you have it. Democrats feel that they cannot wait on this. They have to move right now. Mr. Cicilline just said he believes this is a, quote, crime in progress in terms of soliciting foreign interference. And so regardless of what future evidence Democrats may uncover as they continue to investigate the president, the time, he said, is now for these impeachment articles.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Rebecca. Let's talk about, Zeke, Trump's legal team. Mitch McConnell obviously probably meeting with them, trying to create some sort of roadmap as to how they're going to approach it. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously that's going to be the big test for the White House and Senate Republicans over the next couple of weeks. Certainly likely over the holiday break is when a lot of that's going to be ironed out. They're going to have to bridge the divide between where the president is at and where Senate Republicans are in terms of the length of the trial, the film, what they want out of it. The good thing for Mitch McConnell right now is that a lot of folks in the White House counsel tend to agree with him in terms of trying to keep this likely trial contained and as swift as possible. The challenges the president and some of his political allies are vocally disagreeing with them, but McConnell has a pretty good track record in terms of leading out the president on issues like these and convince him that it's in his best interest to adopt a different tack. So that seems to be the likeliest course of action right now. But, with this president, we've seen him, on suspending bills on other issues when he wants something. Sometimes he has a way of blowing a process to get it. So that'll be something to watch over the next couple of weeks. Certainly on the president's Twitter account, he says he really wants to call folks like Joe Biden or Adam Schiff or the whistleblower in the Senate, that could really throw a wrench into what Mitch McConnell has planned.
Yeah, obviously, Mitch McConnell having a shorter timeline and wanting to kind of mitigate the situation while the president wants to kind of vindicate himself. Can we talk about NAFTA really quickly and USMCA? How does this all play, and what do we need to know?
Obviously, this has been one of the key priorities of the president since his campaign days, and certainly once that agreement was reached in principle last year, it was the president's top legislative priority. And here, just a couple of weeks before the end of the session, in the middle of impeachment, he's getting a significant legislative victory. That appears to be the course that we are on, with that vote coming just a day apart from when he's likely to be impeached. That's a sort of a striking sort of split-screen image here in Washington. Some are criticizing the Democrat strategy there in terms of why is asking questions like, why is Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker, giving the president this sort of victory as she's trying to remove him from office, or certainly in the run-up to his reelection. This will no doubt be a frequent stump line for the president as he conducts his reelection over the next 11 months or so. He's going to try, this is something he talked about in 2016. It's going to fit right into what his campaign says. This is their message of promises made, promises kept. So, this is, at the same time, it gives Nancy Pelosi an opportunity for herself and for her members to say that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, that impeachment is not the only thing that they are doing. They're trying to make progress on substance. And Democrats, like the president, have had their own issues with NAFTA for quite some time. So this is a little bit on the substance, a bit of a win-win for the president and the Democrats. But on the politics, that remains to be seen how that's going to shake out.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the things that a lot of congressmen have been sort of reiterating, especially on the Republican side. Rebecca, what are moderate Republicans thinking? Because they're going to play such a huge moderate Democrats thinking, because of course they're going to play a huge factor in this.
They do, and they're really the reason that Democrats took control of the House in 2018. It was not these deep blue districts that elected members like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It was these suburbs that had Republican representatives and flipped in 2018 that really won the Democrats their majority. And for a lot of them, that means that they did have, or they still do have, a lot of supporters of the president back home. So this has been, for many of them, a tough decision. We've heard members saying they're going to go home and do some soul searching this weekend. Others looked at the Ukraine scandal that their fellow Democrats have been investigating and said that that was enough of a line for them. I want to read you a quote from someone we spoke with earlier today. It's Elaine Luria, this freshman representative from Virginia who defeated a Republican in 2018 to win her seat. And she said, and I quote, "I always said it was not a political decision. It was about what was wrong and what was right. And if I don't get reelected in 2020 because of it, I'll know that I did the right thing and I was on the right side of history." So that kind of shows you the gravity of how these members are thinking about what they have to do right now. And for some of them, they're saying it may cost me my seat, but I have to do the right thing. And for others, they're not going to come to that conclusion. We talked a little bit earlier about Representative Van Drew from New Jersey, also represents a district with a pretty sizable portion of Republicans. And for him, he actually has said that he would have preferred to see the president censured by the House instead of actually impeached. He thinks impeachment is much more divisive for the country. And he said he hasn't seen anything new in the investigation conducted by the House Intelligence Committee that's going to make him want to vote in favor of these articles of impeachment. So you have a real divide. And that's why you heard Representative Cicilline just now telling us that Democrats are not going to try to force their members to vote in one direction or the other. It's a vote of conscience. And that's the message that they are sending to that big 200-plus person Democratic caucus.
And Nancy Pelosi has been reiterating that all day today, that telling reporters that, Democrats won't try to gauge how colleagues plan to vote. But I have to imagine, Zeke, that the Trump campaign will plan on capitalizing on some of these stressors that are out there, especially in swing states.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The Trump campaign, as this hearing got underway earlier this morning, they were hosting about 40-some-odd reporters in a hotel conference room in Arlington, Virginia, across the Potomac, to sort of lay out their campaign strategy for the coming year. And they said impeachment was, in some ways, the greatest gift they'd been given, that every time the president's been attacked, his supporters rally around him to defend him. And this has sort of been the ultimate sort of attack on his legitimacy. So they've seen their fundraising, their volunteers, all of those things fly off the charts, as they put it, over the last couple of months. So it's really interesting to see how that's playing out on their side. But the challenge that they have is, they're trying to portray the president as a victim, but also trying to sort of point out how they view it as a potent campaign weapon from them going into 2020. And I think both things are for them are true. They're trying not to be gleeful as the president undergoes this process, but from their standpoint, this has been in some ways the greatest motivating tool they've had for this campaign in quite some time.
So do you think, Zeke, that some of the Trump campaign is possibly weaponizing what's happening and the inconsistencies of where people are standing because of election 2020?
Absolutely. One of the things we saw when the House voted laying out the rules for impeachment a month or so ago was, they pointed out there was a bipartisan opposition to that motion because there were those Democratic defections I heard just talking about with Rebecca. So that's likely what's going to happen as these articles of impeachment are considered, and certainly when it makes it to the Senate. So they're trying to argue that this is a partisan endeavor, and the fact that they've been able to keep Republicans largely in lockstep here in support of the president is, from their standpoint, a powerful motivating tool. And for every Democrat they're able to bring across the aisle, that makes their argument all the much stronger.
Yeah, from what we're all hearing, Republicans are lockstep and united with the president. But I got to imagine, Rebecca, that Nancy Pelosi's been dealing with her share of criticism, especially from the president. How is she handling it? And has it moved her in any which way to sort of fight back and to push forth her agenda?
She is always pushing back against the president in her very Pelosi-esque way, which is to say fairly brisk and with a lot of confidence. The president has started calling these impeachment light, these articles of impeachment, and our own Nancy Cordes asked her about that in her press conference this morning, and Pelosi's answer was just, the president is wrong. She's very confident in where she is steering her party. She never really cracks in public. I think that's one of the reasons that we have seen her get into so many kind of tiffs with the president at these White House meetings, why he seems to in some ways be so rattled by her, and she really seems to get under his skin in a way that no other lawmaker does, is because she's always fairly collected when she's dealing with the president's criticisms of her path. She controls this caucus with an iron fist. Up until this point, when we were asking questions about what was coming next with articles of impeachment, aides were really privately saying to us that they were waiting to see what the speaker was going to tell them to do. At the end of the day, it is her decision. Nothing happens in the Democratic caucus without her sign-off. So she seems very confident in where she is steering all of her members right now, and I think we will continue to see that.
All right, Rebecca Kaplan, thank you. The gavel has fallen. Zeke Miller, Rebecca Kaplan, thank you so much. We want to take you back now to Capitol Hill, where the House Judiciary Committee is continuing its debate on the articles of impeachment against President Trump. Let's watch.